But I also think how we relate to the broader community. I think it starts with awareness because if people are not aware that these structures are so vulnerable and that artist compensation is so challenged, then it's hard to get in the mindset of what do we need to do to then figure out how we can help support that and fix that. So I think the starting point is just that sort of understanding that that we all need to be advocates. We all need to self-advocate for the arts, and we need to understand where those connection points are for all of us.
I really love that non-transactional engagement, and I want to bring in because I think both Ashley and Tiger could have examples of that. I mean, for those of y'all who don't know, Tiger also manages a theater down in Franklin, Louisiana. I know that Ashley, you've often ended up in engagements with politicians at parades, at music concerts, at ballet shows. And I just wondered if you wanted to share some stories of success about that as well. Either one of y'all can jump in on that.
I mean, I've gotten a lot of work done over the years at Super Sunday and at Jazz Fest, and it just is what it is, right? And at second lines, right? Also at music venues, sometimes at galleries, museums. And that's where, I've often said that the bulk of my work, bubbles up from the streets, right? Because in New Orleans, for much of the cultural community, you can't really um, be an effective advocate unless you're out there, right? It's because so much of what we do is out there, right? And it's one of the reasons what makes one of the reasons why we're so special and so distinctive from other communities. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is very non-transactional, and I see some politicians out at some of these events, some more than others, but I mean, Mayor Cantrell and I got to know each other that way, and I mean, you say what you want about the last 4 years. First 4 years were great. We had a really, really, we were very productive the first 4 years of her administration, and have been with other city council members as well. But, a lot of that is because we're invited to these events because it's more importantly, we know people in the cultural community. I mean, that's our job, and it's also what we want to do. So, I mean, again, that's kind of organic for us because we love New Orleans, and we love New Orleans because of, what the culture creates. So of course we're out there, right? Um, we're not here because it's functional. I say that too often, but everyone knows that who lives here. But at any rate, yeah, I mean, Michael's absolutely right. Gene's right, and so is Tiger. I mean, it's when it comes to, connecting with us too. I mean, all you have to do is, shoot me an email or, give me a call. I mean, you can become a member of the Ella Project, or you can, obviously, if you need legal services, come to our workshops, come to our socials. But I think that the more that we all have access to each other, and I'll talk about that more later after Michael has a chart that I want to talk more about this after Michael presents his chart because it's a good one. But anyway, the more that we all get to know each other and maintain our relationships, because that's really important is maintenance, right? I mean, it's just like with your personal relationships. If you don't maintain them, then they wither, right? Become diluted, and then you don't know people anymore. And so I think it's just important to just stay out there. I know
Absolutely.
that seems so simple, but it's just so real.
Yeah. Well, my thing is it's about the human connection. These guys and ladies, whenever they become whether they're representatives, mayors, or council members, they're human. And it's all about the human connection. It's about telling your story. Everybody has a story. As a Louisiana artist, we all have stories. We all have our triumphs. We all have our tribulations. We have those struggles that we can make them relate to because they're not above us. They are just like us. And I believe the more and more you engage with them, that's where it comes in. Inviting them to your shows, inviting them to your galleries, inviting them to your museums, inviting them whatever you have going on, inviting them, inviting everybody from the mayor all the way up. Last night, I did a concert last night on a Monday, and I had my mayor, my entire council, and my state rep there, only because I asked them. And the thing about it is when you become knowing them, when you know them on a one-on-one basis, it's easier to talk to them. They feel less vulnerable when they're at the Capitol. they have a facade on, and it's hard to break through that because they're getting hit by so much there. But engaging with them outside of that space and getting to know them, letting them know your art personally. Because, like I tell everybody, artists, Louisiana artists, we give a piece of our soul with our art. And if you give that to that legislator, to that mayor, to that council member, to whomever you're trying to get involved with your organization, that captures them. You're going to leave them with something that they're not going to forget. And you're also going to leave them with something that they get to bring to Baton Rouge or to the state cap, to their offices when it comes out to the point of trying to make policy, whether it's locally or state or federally.
And I want to add to that. Thank you, Tiger. I forgot to mention that, when it comes to, being at events and, being at Super Sunday and being at Jazz Fest, when the policymakers see you, uh, with your constituents, when they see me at Super Sunday with Mardi Gras Indians and watch us interacting and see that it's a positive and a meaningful relationship, then that credentials you into the conversation as someone who's actually representative and not just some poser, right? Because there's all kinds of posers. They're always trying to like advocate for whatever the hell, right? But if the policymakers know that you actually are represent that you do have a stake in the conversation and that you're a trusted source, then they're more likely to call upon you when establishing things like advocacy working groups, which I can't tell you how many I've been a part of, which that is good and also kind of annoying, but it's permitted me to be able to be an effective advocate. So that's really important. They have to see you engaging in the actual um, activities that you are trying to promote.
Yeah, if I could just build on that real quick, just to tie the loop between what Ashley and Tiger are saying. Again, I'm joining you from DC, and I've spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, and it's sometimes hard to just understand like how hard and depressing those jobs are for congressional staff members. I mean, basically their job is stacked, day after day of these endless meetings with these interest groups that want, come in and feel like they have some agency to tell you as a staff person, get your boss to do something the boss doesn't want to do. And it's just like it's depressing. It's sad. And when they can meet with artists or arts representatives and tap into a different part of their brain, a different part of their experience and their humanity, you create this opportunity. And we say non-transactional, that sometimes you're coming in with a very specific thing, a piece of legislation you want them to pass or a program you want them to support. But when you're also investing in just building that relationship, the gold standard for any advocate is for someone, at the State House to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Tiger, what do you need?" Right? It's not Tiger saying, "Do this for me." It's like, no, like, "Hey, Ashley, what's going on? What do we need to be doing?" So if you can be mindful that ultimately we're going to have the most success as advocates if we're thought of as a trusted resource and a guide and someone who can really help, create context around these really challenging issues, that's going to give us more success than any sort of traditional, like old school lobbying effort is going to have.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think it dovetails to a question we had in the chat, which, was, I think, understandable. If you're new to this and you're a small, maybe one or two person art shop, that sometimes that can be difficult to begin engagement. But your advice there is just really to begin engagement, right? And expand on that as you wish.
What I would do, and just looking at the question, instead of going to the state capitol on that, you hit them outside of session, go visit them, set an appointment at their office. That's the way to really engage. Set the appointment and just tell them you want 15, 20 minutes of their time to let them know that you exist and go from that route there. And then that relationship's going to start.
Yeah, I'll second that because I've had that same experience. And sometimes it may be they're going to say, we can see you in 2 months. Okay, no problem. But, there's very few, I would hazard to say never, but there's very few politicians that if you say, I'm a constituent, I've got one issue, I want 15 minutes of your time, I'll come whenever you need me to, who's going to say no?
But I will also jump in because I have had this issue too, right? And I think that both Tiger and Gene are right. But when you when you can't get someone to pay attention, you just really have to leverage your resources and your relationships, right? Because they have a vote. Votes are important, right? So if you can get a hold of someone that you know has a good relationship with whomever it is you're trying to seek their attention, then, have them reach out with you or host an event where you're honoring someone that is important to you know, to their visibility when it comes to getting constituents to vote for them, right? Um, it's pressure, right? So, I mean, I hate to say like shame them, but if you can't get someone in the room, like try to whatever activity you have to engage in, then do that so that like if they don't show up for something, then they'll look like shit, right? So, and politicians love like ribbon cutting ceremonies. They love events where they can be seen and show that they are actually like paying attention and whether they are or not, right? But that gets them in the room with you. So that's what I would recommend.
And it
Excellent.
doesn't have to be a
But
volume game. I'm sorry, Gene. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go for quantity. I mean, typically you don't have enough time to manage 15 relationships. So if there's a particular office that's just not being responsive, maybe there's a different office, maybe it's a different level of government. But if, really you're typically looking for a limited number of relationships that you have bandwidth to manage of individuals that really understand, again, whether you're thinking state, federal, or local, that they understand the sort of political dynamics they're working in. They've got information and resources and strategy, and they can really help, be a thought partner. So if there's if you keep calling the congressional office and they're just like not interested, then maybe go for the mayor's office, maybe go for a county council person, things like that.
excellent, excellent. So we've talked and we've gotten some good philosophical ideas down here. I wanted to dive into a little bit of specifics and looking back at some of your careers and especially from markets outside of Indiana, but not necessarily. Um, what are some specific campaigns or actions that you saw that where you saw artists getting involved and you were like, you know what, this was really a successful campaign and this is a model that could be replicated in other communities? Michael, you probably have the largest national perspective, but I know all three of y'all do, but I'm going to start with you.
That's such a that's such a good question, Gene. I mean, I think let me take it a couple of ways without going on too long. I think one is the biggest has been the sort of evolution of groups like this, understanding how they can build positive and productive ongoing relationships with their local and regional sort of government entities. And a really great example of that is the evolution of what happened in the Seattle community, going back to the 90s into how that evolved into present day. Seattle, when the music scene exploded commercially in the 1990s, the sort of institutions of government, um, the city attorney and others really were concerned about, they didn't see this as a good thing necessarily. They were really concerned about like, what is the impact on youth? And they actually passed a teen dance ordinance that basically outlawed, made it illegal for all ages, venues to thrive. And they put up all these barriers. And there was an evolution in the mindset that really took place in the late 90s and early part of the century that actually said, no, we need to be in alignment and we need to build infrastructure that allows our community stakeholders to really work with our local and regional government to understand where those sort of partnerships are. And really, for the last 20 years, you can't really be elected dog catcher in that region if you don't have a productive relationship with your music community and with the creative sector. So they've, created multiple layers of models of public infrastructure, of commissions that sort of bridge that gap and sort of ongoing process so you can have that dialogue in a sense of we're in this together, let's figure out what the win-win type things are. So from a process standpoint, that certainly jumps out at me. I think a second that I would really call out is, and Ashlye mentioned this earlier, is the evolution of the nighttime economy, sort of ecosystem, and the idea that now we have several dozen cities in the United States that actually have these positions. And I think, I mean, from DC, the work that's happened in New Orleans with the nighttime economy office is unbelievably impressive and smart. And I'm excited. We're all excited to see kind of where that goes. But the idea of saying, here's a particular sector, a particular slice of this broad, sort of complicated community that we're dealing with that has particular idiosyncratic needs and concerns and challenges. And what I think is really important about that is that these cities, as they've onboarded this new sort of role, every city's doing it a little bit differently. Every city, it may be in a different part of city government. They may have different priorities. It could be, coming at it from different lenses. But they have come together in a national network called Nightcap to basically say, how do we learn from each other? We're all building this as we go. So how do we connect the dots between what's happening in DC or New Orleans or New York or Pittsburgh or these other communities? So the idea of government sector coming in and saying, we're going to build our capacity to be able to advocate and understand the particular needs of what happens after dark and translate into sort of best practices and scalable policies, I think has been really, really exciting to watch. I could keep going, but let me stop there and then we can circle back if there's time for more.
No, no, that's good, Michael. Tiger, similarly, I know that you're involved with networks similar like South Arts, and I was just wondering about, what you guys take out of those conversations, and if you've seen something that it doesn't have to be South Arts, but I mean, I think that it's always the most applicable to start with the region where we're in to say, you know what, this was something that was done in XYZ community, and I think this is something that we could engage in Louisiana.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a great resource for me, not only with South Arts, but after Americans for the Arts and as well as the Creative States Coalition. Matter of fact, this past week I was in Austin at a convening where, all 50 states arts advocacy directors met in Austin, and we kind of, iron sharpens iron. We hear that in the Bible, and it's still true today. The one big thing takeaway that I've ever seen or heard of at these convenings is an arts caucus. So that's something that my board really said, let's move forward on that. And so LPA was able to push that forward in the spring of 2025, earlier this year. And we've had overwhelming response. And that was to create that two-way conversation between artists and legislators. And that's the thing. It's making sure that we have a two-way street. So it's not just a one ask. It's not us asking constantly for, more funding, which, we want, but it's also making sure that they are educated, our legislators are educated in when it comes to policy issues that will affect, Louisiana artists and arts educators. So I think that's been the biggest thing. Also with them, again, going back to that human connection, them hearing those human experiences from us, us relaying to them, like, I'm just using, one event, like I'm going to use Dancing Grounds, in New Orleans, where, when the NEA and everyone was getting slashed, and then there was pauses on potential funding coming out, and it caused uncertainty with them, and for a small arts organization, coming up, it just causes so much uncertainty within your budget, within your programming, and that flows into the community, especially when it becomes an underserved community that's already, doesn't have the funds to be able to have that access like normal. So we want to make sure that we're that voice going into the legislature, that voice going into to speak to mayors in the local level, making sure that they understand that access and exposure to the arts should be right there with tourism, because arts and tourism is hand in hand in Louisiana. You can't separate the two. Art and culture is Louisiana tourism.
And two things that you hit on there. You mentioned the Arts Caucus, which I'm very excited about. For people on this call, how do they find out if their representative is in the Arts Caucus?
Absolutely. We have a running list. I'm gonna have to ask Shauna if it's on our webpage yet. I know Leah with the state has a running list that we're working together with. So we'll make sure that it's on our web pages and go from there. Make sure you're a member of the legislators on the Arts Caucus. We've had overwhelming success. Pretty much anytime I get in front of a legislator, they join on, and they were like, why haven't we had this, 20, 40 years ago? But I'm like, but we have it now. So join it now. Let's start that conversation. Let's not let's have that conversation. So
And you kind of anticipated my next question. So if I look and my legislator is not on the list, what should I do?
oh, absolutely. So if he's not on the list, and look, Leah's happy to share the list. She just put it in the chat. So there's her email. Um, and that's the great thing. You have to have a great partnership, state arts agencies with arts advocacy agencies, with everybody, with our artists. If we are not rowing that boat together in the same direction, and I use the Mississippi River, if you try to row the Mississippi River by yourself, that current's going to take you. But if we all partner together and we join together, hey, somebody's going to have a motor somewhere, as we'll be able to get down the bayou somewheres, right? So, I'm sorry. So, Gene, you got me off track on that one.
That's okay. What should they do? I'm not the
Oh,
person's not on the list. What do I do?
hey, contact them. I'm in their face. I'm gonna tell you, I'm in their face. I'm loud. I'm using other legislators, other senators to get in front of others. I mean, I'm engaged with the lieutenant governor's office. I'm engaged with the governor's office. I'm engaged with all of our federal delegation, and sometimes they just want to make sure that it's not costing them money. A lot of caucuses, it costs money to be on a caucus, not the Arts Caucus. We are free. We want it to be a two-way conversation for our Louisiana artists. We don't want this to be a money-making idea. We want this to make sure that they understand what each one of our Louisiana artists, our arts organizations, our arts educators are going through on a daily basis. Things, the barriers that they face each and every day, whether it's in the classroom, on the stage, in the community. What How can they make it easier for artists to be able to be artists in Louisiana? Because we're the reason why, as Louisiana artists, that we get so many people in our state to eat our food, to come be part of our culture, experience our culture. There's no other place like it in the world.
Excellent. Well, we're going to see if we can get everybody signed up by the end of next year. That would be great. One of the things that we talked about in our pre-chat was just about the idea about engagement, audience, et cetera. And Michael and Ashlye, I know you had thoughts on that. So I wanted to bring you in, and if you want me to bring up the graphic, I can do that at this time as well.
Yeah, that'd be great, Gene, if you don't mind. And so something that again everyone in this webinar knows incredibly well is this is just an unprecedented time for competition, for eyeballs, for time, for where we put our attention. And when we think about trying to reach audiences and try to sort of bring groups together and particularly populate venues, it's just a really complicated time. And it's gone beyond, sort of the cliches about like when I grew up, like we were bored because we didn't have cable TV. And now it's really, especially for younger people, it's a FOMO. It's a sense of I've got to keep up. There's so many things, and it's becoming harder and harder. I think, we're starting to see this in the data. It's harder and harder for younger people to get off the couch and to get into live rooms and get into venues. And so this chart, which Gene has put up, is a way to kind of visualize driving audience engagement and action. And I think it also really applies to what we're talking about today in terms of advocacy. And I know the text is small, so I apologize for that. But it's a way to sort of to visualize and sort of think about what are the different stages that we can be working with as we think about our community. And if we think about all the people Tiger said, all the people that participate in Louisiana culture, who travel to Louisiana, people who idolize and just it is so, so much so important for them. How do we bring them along and continue them to understand that we actually need interventions, that we need policy and funding and different economic structures to actually make this ecosystem work because it's so vulnerable without interventions. And a way to think about this is you start with awareness. So do you know a thing exists? And for today's webinar, we can say, do people know that there's a structural problem and vulnerability in our creative industries? Some people know that. A lot of people don't know that. They just think it's just going along just fine. Then there's the second stage, which is interest and curiosity. So are they, so they know there's a problem. Are they researching that? Are they thinking about that? Are they talking to their networks? Are they investigating? Are they curious about their own consumption habits? Are they thinking about when is the last time I went to a show or went to the theater or saw, went to a local gallery, things like that? The third stage then is engagement. And are they actually taking action? Are they actually doing a thing? So are they actually going to the music event? Are they going to the gallery opening? Are they going to the play? Are they getting off the couch, out of the house, and actually engaging in a piece of art or content? Or in the context of advocacy, are they dropping an email? Are the people on this call today? Is everyone in this webinar dropping an email to their local reps? Are they listening to Tiger's team in terms of what y'all could be doing locally in the state? So are they engaging to sort of think about how I have some agency to help support or engage with what the problem is or the challenges are? Then ideally you're becoming a champion, you're taking action. So you're joining Tiger's organization and the Ella Project if you haven't already joined. Obviously today you're in this webinar, so you're already engaging, you're taking action. Who are the people in your networks that aren't in today's webinar that need to think about this and need to be brought into this at a higher level? So they're taking those actions and those engagements. And then finally, it's advocacy. And that's really where you're supporting the partner goals. And again, in the context of like being a music fan, advocacy can be I could have brought 10 more people to that venue to see that brass band. Like I'm next time that brass band is playing, I'm going to hassle my friends. We're going to get 10 more people out there because that place was not as full as it needed to be. In terms of today's discussion, advocacy is literally advocacy. So again, it's identifying who are the organizations that speak to you, that connect with you in terms of where you live and what you care about, and how do you follow those champions, and how do you sort of engage in what those leaders and champions at the Ella Project and LA Partners are partnership. What do they need from you, and how can you help them, and how can you support them? So it's a way, again, of just thinking about something that's very complicated and overwhelming because we just have so much freaking stuff in the world. I mean, is Lane coming to LSU or not? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to track. And how do we put it into bite-sized sort of pieces to think about like, okay, what are the things we have control over to kind of move through a progression?
Excellent. And Ashley, I think that this slide dovetails to one of the projects that we certainly championed here in New Orleans, which was the creation of the NOLA Music Census that went out last year and something that we've been working on for many years. So I wonder, A, your thoughts about this audience engagement, but also maybe touch on some of the importance of data and getting the information so that you can make your case where it's not just, I believe this and you should believe it too, but we have some numbers behind it to back it up.
Well, sure. I was going to first talk about, well, I'll get to the census and the nighttime economy office, but just applying these principles that Michael was talking about in this chart, which I love so much. I'm gonna go back a little bit further because I'm gonna take a reactionary anecdote and a proactive anecdote that were actually related. So when it came to the noise ordinance, and when it comes to the noise ordinance. So I was obviously aware of a lot of the challenges in connection with what was an 8 p.m. curfew where musicians were getting arrested literally for playing on the street, which the city marketed, for tourists. But so that was part of the awareness, and our organization obviously had a deep interest in ensuring that you know that our musicians could perform publicly, but also that the venues um, were not unnecessarily penalized by sound levels that were not feasible. And so, we engaged a bunch of working groups with stakeholders from clubs and, buskers and, just, music performers, right? And along with, government officials. And when it came to activating, I had to separate myself from as an advocate versus an attorney, and basically went to a bunch of city council meetings and, as an attorney, used the law that of course it's patently unconstitutional to prevent people from gathering. It's First Amendment, right? That's why they call it the first one. And we had a ton of partnerships with other nonprofit organizations and with individuals. And so that was for the most part, successful. We got a declaration from the city attorney's office that the 8 p.m. curfew is unconstitutional. Now, it may still rear its ugly head because for reasons that are too much to get into, because New Orleans doesn't ever fix its laws. But um, the reason why I went into that is because, and I forgot to mention earlier, so Michael and I co-founded the Music Policy Forum, and I was a board member on it for a long time. And the reason why I bring that up, and this is more important than the previous anecdote, is because when it came to lobbying for the music census and for the establishment of the nighttime economy office, one of the reasons why that was important was the experiences that we had with, dealing with the whole noise ordinance situation. And when, so we know about these challenges, right? I mean, we've just come off of this huge challenge. And, one of the resources that Music Policy Forum offers is convenings, conferences, and ways to engage with people in other cities that are, that are doing work that we ought to be considering. So I had no idea that there was even such a thing as a music census or as a nighttime or economy office or a night mayor or a nightlife office, as the case may be. It's all the same, right? Well, there's actually different frameworks and different models, and that's important too, because um, part of advocating for something is, again, having an understanding of what you are advocating for, and understanding part of that, part of what I think makes you effective is understanding the different ways what you're advocating for could be applicable to any given situation. So how would the music census work in New Orleans? How would it apply? What kind of model would work the best? How would it be administered? Or how would a nighttime economy office, like what would the scope of that be? What would work here? What works in other cities? And so I wouldn't have known about any of this but for the fact that I was constantly networking through Music Policy Forum and meeting with folks and in other areas. And when we were engaging around the establishment of the census and the nighttime office, after obviously a lot of conversations with our cultural stakeholders, we were able to get the mayor's office, the Department of Health, the safety and permits, cultural economy, in addition to the council people for District C and District B at the time, and some of their folks, to go on a learning journey to Seattle and San Francisco through the resources that Michael and the organization Music Policy Forum offered, and to do deep dives with the people who administer similar agencies in those cities, because those cities had similarly situated challenges where they responded too late, as Michael was talking about earlier, and it's not affordable to live in Seattle and in San Francisco. Not that it's not affordable, not that it's affordable here. We were just ranked third most house broke city in the country, which is why all of this advocacy is so important, right? So, but we went to both of those cities, brought our policymakers with us so that they could learn about the inner workings, not just through like a handbook, but actually speaking with community members and talking with policemen who are, in charge of, answering 311 calls for noise complaints, and meeting with the Entertainment Commission and finding out what they do, how they, policies like agent of change, and I won't get into too deeply right now, and, tax incentives for sound abatement, which we have now. This was all a product of this engagement, right? And so when we found out that this nighttime office, or some of, an iteration of it could actually be helpful in addressing a lot of the challenges that New Orleans already had, and the noise ordinance is an obvious one, and it's one that the politicians here don't ever want to have to deal with again. They hate it. They don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They avoid it like the plague. They avoid it more than they did COVID. Trust me. And I use that as leverage, because I'm like, if you don't want to deal with this, you need to establish this office so that you don't have to do it and they can do it for you. That was one point of leverage. And then there was a bunch of other stuff too. And so that was part of activating around that. And then, getting, again, like, stakeholders and other nonprofit groups and people in the private sector, like club owners, to, really gel around the idea and endorse the idea of having an agency that is a single point person to prevent like all of these enforcement agencies that we have here from um, screwing up, right? I mean, from for violating the law by just um, not knowing how to apply it or not playing from the same handbook. I mean, this is stuff you all already know. You know better than I do how ridiculous it is here trying to get, various agencies and well, just the agencies alone to to come together in unison around like what the rules are for permitting. I mean, for permitting alone. And so it's very complicated. And so that's why, we used all of these and other leverage points to get this office established. But I mean, we really did go down this chart. I didn't realize there was, I mean, I didn't see this chart till yesterday, but that's why I love it so much because I was like, oh, that's exactly how we worked that out. And it was the same with the music census.
Mhm.
We got that done before the nighttime. Well, we got that done after the nighttime office was established, but we'd been lobbying for that for years. And we had the data points um, via the census, the similar census that was administered in other cities to show this how it how it helped bring in or how it helped with quality of life and how it helped to address economic engine drivers, right? So the city always or government always wants to know about like how can you bring in more dollars, and so we used the data that way too to skew it, and well, not skew it, but I mean to leverage it in order to get the attention of these policy makers, because it's really hard to ignore revenue, right? Or the economy. Anyway, so I don't know if I answered your question, Gene, but all of this was related, and it's, it relates back to our funding, our advocacy for funding too, because you can't really achieve a lot of these initiatives without the money, right? And Michael always says there's always money. It's just a matter of how you align resources. So I'm sorry I stole your quote, Michael, but I use it all the time. And it's true, except for right now, because the city really doesn't have any money. It's got like lots of negative money, but it will have money again someday, we hope. So anyway.
And I mean, I think that dovetails pretty well. I wanted to know if we wanted to expand on this because I've often seen strong arts advocacy efforts around stopping something bad from happening. We don't want this club to close, or we don't want the funding to be cut, or we don't want this program to go away. But I wonder if you guys in your careers have other examples, and this was certainly a great one, as you said. The nightlife office and the census, it was an overnight success that took 12 years to actually happen. Um, but other things that you've seen in your career where we've seen artists affect positive change, where it's not just we stopped the bad thing from it happening, but we were able to make something positive happen. Just things that you've seen that you think people would enjoy hearing about. And anyone who wants to jump in, feel free to.
I could start. I think one of the great positive things that I've seen come out from a grassroots effort came out of Region 4 at the Acadiana Center for the Arts in Lafayette. They created the Louisiana Scoring Office. And it started with, like I said, a grassroots effort, just the ACA and Sam Oliver and David Boudreaux over there. And with this idea of creating opportunity for musicians to be able to be part of something bigger than themselves, something bigger, whether it's the movie industry, whether it's the gaming industry, whether it's podcast commercials. Everybody needs music. And what they've created started, like I said, grassroots. Then they got involved with the Lafayette Economic Development Authority, and then that led to Louisiana Economic Development Authority, and then that led into the Louisiana legislature. So they were able to grab some legislative dollars or some appropriations funds to kind of shore up that office to make it happen. And I was able to go to the ribbon cutting. So seeing something like that and having musicians have more opportunity to play beyond just whether they're in an orchestra, whether they're gigging on weekends or such, but seeing them to be able to have constant dollars coming in and them being active, consistently. I think that that's one of the most impressive, I guess, projects that I've seen become funded in a while.
No, I love that example. That's perfect. Michael or Ashley, something you guys want to share?
Michael, you go first.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think there's a really exciting example around what's happened with independent venues in the last 7 years. As most of the people in this webinar know, the independent music scene and the venue scene is just incredibly competitive, and it's very hard to stay afloat. And in many markets, independent venues, in the face of sort of runaway consolidation of the large players have really viewed themselves as competitors and not as allies. And talk about responding to a crisis in Chicago, before the pandemic. The outgoing mayor of the city wanted to bring in Live Nation to build multiple venues in a way that would have really upset the sort of very delicate independent ecosystem there. And through the work of Ashley and me and a bunch of other folks, we were able to help support the creation of what became the Chicago Independent Venue League, which is an effort of the independent venues in Chicago to understand that they actually have a lot more in common, and could really benefit from working in alignment. Um, and for better or for worse, that created the template. Then, when pandemic happened a year later, that became the template for the National Independent Venue Association, which again, many people in this webinar have been very active and big players in. And NEVA was able to go from being just a concept to a force within 6 months. They drove federal legislation that set aside $16.25 billion to keep venues afloat that had to close during pandemic. And I think what's really exciting is now post-pandemic, they now are a very active and engaged and incredibly effective force for the broader community. The State of Live national research that they came out with earlier this year is the biggest scale sort of documentation of the challenges and opportunities and the impact facing independent music and other venues. They've documented that 64% of independent venues are losing money and are really hanging on by tenterhooks. And we really need to be very intentional with what do we do to support that ecosystem moving forward. And they also have advanced legislation at the state and local level, looking at things like secondary ticketing abuses and sort of challenges in the consumer marketplace as it relates to ticketing. And so the idea again of these groups that historically view themselves as fierce competitors, to understand that they really do have a lot to benefit from building structures of collaboration and partnership and really engaging with the policy community. And I would, just to put a cap on it, to understand that art and culture is not, it's political because there's a policy implication, but it's not partisan. And to see them understand that the game here is not to align with a particular ideology or try to pick teams, but to be above our kind of broken partisan politics, to say this is about humanity and community and culture and economic development and cultural tourism and everything else. But let's, just be very pragmatic, understand that, if you're playing the long game in advocacy, picking sides is it might feel good for 2 years, when that side's in power, but these things have a way of kind of ebbing and flowing, going back and forth. So I think the sort of growth and evolution of NEVA is something that we're really, really excited by, and we're proud to have played a small part in.
Absolutely. Nice work there, Michael and Ashley as well.
Well, I was going to say much to Michael's point, and I can't believe you haven't brought this up yet, Michael. So, and it relates to the independent venues. So we were like a week into the pandemic, and Michael had this brilliant idea to establish a cohort of cities from, I mean, how many cities were part of Revs?
Like
And
18. Mhm.
18, and a lot of music venues and just people who are both from the private and public sector, that had some sort of relationship to music venues and music. And it was called Reopening Every Venue Safely, because we thought we would be back in 2 weeks at the time, right? So that's why we called it Revs, like revving up to reopen. So that we quickly changed the topic of that conversation when we realized, and we didn't know it was going to be like a year, but when we realized we weren't opening in the summer, to really reimagining the future of the music industry. And from those conversations, I hate meeting to meet, but I loved those meetings because, there was so much to learn from all of these different people from all of these different cities. And everyone was just in idea mode because, that's all we had to do. I mean, all we could do is use our imagination to figure out these, some of the uh, to some of the solutions to these challenges, and it was working. And we've applied a lot of those ideas to our advocacy work during and since, and shared a lot of that with folks who were local. I had a list of, I think, like 200 people on an email thread that I would share the feedback with from each of these meetings, and they were very engaged. At the same time, I was meeting with uh, two or three working groups of musicians locally on working to establish better practices for for performances at venues. And they had great ideas. And I have this awesome contract that I drafted as a result of meeting with all of these musician stakeholders that I give out all the time. For those of you who need a performance contract that addresses some of, the concerns that they had, with just, public safety issues at various venues, et cetera. And that led to a greater conversation around, what musicians and what club owners really needed to thrive here as well. And all that was very positive and very proactive. And I was going to say that what I learned and what I don't think we do enough here is, like I said, I hate to meet just to meet, and I think that the nonprofit sector really loves that. But we tend to meet around like a specific issue, which is fine. That needs to happen, right? But the Revs model, where everyone was just meeting to talk to going back to our, the first part of our conversation where things aren't necessarily transactional, I think it would be really great if, people from our sector locally, from statewide, um, nationwide, got together more often, just like as a check-in, without an agenda, just to check in and see what everyone's doing, and to have an informal conversation without some sort of motive, because that's how a lot of this work was actually generated. It was not because, we set out, I mean, we set out to reopen venues safely. But like I said, I mean, that changed radically. And Michael, wouldn't you agree that, I mean, some of our most thrilling conversations and policy ideas came out of these conversations without any specific agenda other than just hanging out?
Well, I think that's right. And I think it gets to, again, that sort of level of curiosity and wanting, especially from the standpoint of policymakers, to want to understand. Oftentimes, it's challenging for advocates to even know what to ask for. And when you have policymakers who are really engaged and they're talking to their colleagues in other cities, as you lay out, Ashley, then they can also come in and say, well, would it be helpful if we did this? Would it be helpful if we did that? Like, in DC, we created a tax rebate to incentivize local venues to play local artists. If you play if you're under 500 cap venue in DC and you play a certain percentage of local music on your stages, you get tax rebates and things like that. That all are not necessarily something that we would have known to ask for, but something that the policymakers are able to put on the table. So I think that is it's hard to find time because we're all so busy and you're exactly right, Ashley. You don't want to meet for sake of meeting, but also just having those being able to relax into those long-standing relationships, and that's where the really good ideas can come from.
Right. And we've also proposed here the exact same program that you were so clever in adopting in DC to provide incentives, tax incentives for more live music. So,
It wasn't me, but yes, I'm the
well,
Chris Naum and all those guys figure that
take
out. It's
credit.
so smart. Nope.
They're not on the call. Anyway.
Yep.
It's a great platform that, yeah, we would love to see in all parts of Louisiana, or Orleans included. I'm going to bring you guys back in on the box, and I'm going to bring up our final question. And this is also a cue to those to put any questions that you have that we have not answered in the chat box, and we'll take them after this. But I wanted to know from your perspectives, statewide, national, locally, what issues do you see coming down the pipe over the next couple of years that you think will be most relevant to the artists on this call? And Tiger, I'll start with you.
Yeah, unfortunately, federal funding cuts. The more and more that the Fed wants to cut the arts out of everything, whether it's the NEA, IMLS, NEH, the ever-changing landscape in Washington, that trickles down to the states, unfortunately. Um, I don't see any, but potential state budgetary constraints. That's something that, will we be able to get an increase in the arts? Whether that be to the regional arts councils or to our state arts agency. That's something that we'll have to look to see, if that's possible. Right now, I think it was last fiscal session, right, that was when the state was pretty much um, going through the Meta deal. So I know Louisiana Economic Development had a lot of money going toward that deal to make that deal happen, and a lot of infrastructure stuff happening as well. So, as arts advocates and arts agencies, we really have to be that loud voice. We have to make sure that people understand and are educated that the Louisiana landscape and Louisiana tourism is because of Louisiana art and culture. It's because of our artists, in those clubs. It's those artists on those stages, working on those canvases, working on that literature and more. It's our cultural bearers. It's our Mardi Gras Indians and all over our state. So it's making sure that we advocate for those dollars, making sure that the lobbyists aren't just the loud voices in Baton Rouge, just making sure that people see art and culture for its worth. Our economic impact is vast in Louisiana. It's more than agriculture. It's more than mining. So sometimes when you educate a legislator on how much art and culture bring in, including the filming industry, into Louisiana, that economic impact, then I believe that's what really, really opens their eyes. But another thing that we have to also um, kind of put on the radar is the misuse of AI. I'm going to label it like that, the misuse of AI, making sure that AI is not taking the jobs of our artists, that it stays a human element. It's not, and I go back to thinking of CGI, and Star Wars and back to 808 beats and taking the place of humans, and we've allowed that to become the norm of our industries. However, now when AI can easily create a song and become number one on the pop charts or the Billboard charts, and that's something that we very really have to be very careful of. That should completely remain in the human element, especially in Louisiana. So I think that's something that we need to look at as well.
Excellent. And Ashley, I want to bring you in and think about some opportunities, the stuff that you see as potential policy wins maybe over the next couple of years that you've got your eyes on right
Oh, I was going to talk about AI, so never
now. Talk
mind.
about AI as well.
Well, I was also going to say I don't know what to do with AI, but I think that I've had so many people reach out to me about AI issues this week, and so it's been on my brain. And Michael can probably speak to this from a federal level. I mean, I know he can, much more extensively than I can, but AI is going to be something that we're talking about, a lot, and from both a policy and regulatory perspective. And I don't have the answer to any of the challenges, the myriad of challenges that are brought by AI, but I do know that I'll be talking with Michael and Tiger and a bunch of you and a bunch of other people from, the private and public sector on how we tackle this thing, like and what that looks like, what the framework for approaching it is. And it's already happening, right? But but it will continue to be an issue. So there's other issues too that, that we're looking at down the line from a, municipal um, perspective. Like I am very concerned about how these funding cuts in New Orleans, how that's going to shape out in this next administration, whether or not, the cultural economy and the ecosystem is going to continue to be prioritized to the extent that it has been. I mean, you all would probably argue it's not been, but compared to other administrations, I would respectfully disagree with that. I don't know how that's going to work out in connection with an agenda that, I mean, rightfully so, is focused largely on getting us back in order, getting our infrastructure back together, and public safety, et cetera. I am concerned that the a lot of the issues that relate back to culture specifically are going to be less of a priority. And oh, I can't even see me. I told you that ray of light thing was going to happen. And so that is something that I'm on the lookout for, and something that I'm ready to tackle.
Excellent. And Michael, you always have a perspective and you're looking forward. Tell me what you guys are working on and what you see as stuff that people on this call should have their eyes on as well over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long list as always. I think a sleeper issue, which I'd be curious how it plays out in Louisiana, is assuming that the federal government moves forward with the Medicaid cuts and the work requirements, that cultural work is viewed as work. And that's a whole set of issues just related to how do we define, rehearsals and practice and all the labor that goes into being a working artist, and how does that count in different boxes. I think the broader piece I would just, yeah, totally co-sign Tiger and Ashley in the comments in the chat. We have a lot to learn from the last 25 years of the digital transformation of our cultural sectors, and we know that without a lot of work and a lot of intervention, a lot of really deep thinking, that the powers that be that are deploying AI are going to be looking to extract maximum value and revenue, and that's you know being really intentional about, I think Tiger said it really well. It's about AI abuse or misuse of AI. Obviously, the tools that are being built are going to be, are and will continue to be very useful for small businesses, which most artists are small businesses and others. So, balancing or having sort of intention around how AI is deployed moving forward and what that means for intellectual property in the cultural industry is just a massive set of issues that I think, I agree with Ashley. I don't think there's any easy answers on any of that stuff. I also would go back to what I said early in the webinar. I think we are having a moment where, for a lot of reasons, that we are really embracing the idea that at the federal level, again, the infrastructure that was built in the 1960s, including public broadcasting and the National Endowment for Arts and Humanities and public big performing arts centers and IMLS, and that infrastructure needs to be rethought. And it probably needed to be rethought anyway. What's happened this year is forcing it to be rethought. And so really, being sort of engaged in the ideation and sort of the visioning about what is the 2030 version of that kind of infrastructure, and how does that relate to funding streams. Again, we don't need to get into in detail today, but I mean, we can look at all these other countries that do different things, that put money in the pocket of musicians, that give them access to capital, through just really creative funding streams and ways of doing this, and stuff that we just don't do in this country. So whether it's rethinking how we put money in the pockets of our artists, if it's thinking about how we engage our audiences, how we think about, again, in-person experiences with art and culture as part of a public health conversation and a community conversation, and pulling other dollars then to really get people into those spaces, to at least make sure that they have exposure and have that sort of in their imagination. Those are things that we're really worried about and are thinking about. And again, I'm optimistic by nature. But I think that I am convinced that the twin demographic trends of younger people not drinking, and the economic impact that's having on our venues and the economics of our live entertainment ecosystem is forcing the decoupling of alcohol sales and live entertainment in a way that probably needed to happen a long time ago. But that is needing to happen in real time. And then just the demographics of Generation Alpha and a much smaller sort of demographic of young people coming of age who are not seen going to live music or live events as they're seen in a very different way because of price concerns and competition, all the other things. So we're going to need some very significant interventions and rethinking about how does this all fit together, or else that entire ecosystem is just going to collapse in the next 10 years.
Well, let's avoid the collapse if at all possible. And I think that that gives great marching orders to really everyone on here to continue to engage in these ideas and look to organizations like yours, look to Music Policy Forum, look to Louisiana Partnership for the Arts, look to the Ella Project. And it sounds like it can be as simple as, hey, I have a thought about this. Have you guys addressed this? And potentially there's information out there, or potentially you go, no, we haven't. Let's talk about it. Because I think that's sort of one of the themes that we've talked about with the engagement of this entire discussion. So
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to do just that. Any final thoughts before we sign off? We don't have anything in the chat. So if there's, I want to give you guys a chance to add anything that you may want to, or potentially just wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, however you choose.
Yeah, I'll start if you don't mind. I just want to talk to the artists out here that are on who took their time out. I am you. I see you. I hear you. I've been there. I still feel the frustration sometimes of not being seen, not being heard. Um, but that led me into knocking on doors and making phone calls and starting at the bottom, working my way up. And then a lot of times, whenever you come into it, everybody immediately thinks that you are uh, gonna ask for money right off. And my biggest things every time I've called the lieutenant governor, before I really knew him, I'd say, I'm not asking for money. I'm looking for exposure. I'm looking for spotlight for the arts. And that's how I would start the conversation. I lead emails that would start out, this is not a request for funding or sponsorship or donation. And a lot of times that definitely gets you into the door. So keep doing what you're doing. What you're doing is very important. What you're doing is actually being seen by a lot of people. You may not feel it, you may not see it now, but you are being seen, you are being heard. But be louder. Be louder together with us. Be louder at the state capitol with us for Arts Day at the Capitol. Make sure that we're seen, make sure that we're heard, make sure that they feel us. That's the main thing. We have our energy, we have our creative energies. Let's make sure that we continue to be the state that rises above every other state in our nation to be the art and culture mecca and the reason why people come to Louisiana through tourism to eat our foods, to see our people, to dance to our music, to live and vibe with our culture. And there's no other place like it, y'all.
Excellent, Tiger. That was eloquent and inspiring and just perfect. Thank you very much. Michael, final thoughts.
No, I'm not following Tiger. Come on.
You got to. I know it's
Tiger
fair
crushed it.
business.
No, it's just thank you everybody for being with us, and thank you to Gene and Ashley for organizing this, and this entire series of workshops is just so indicative of the work that you guys do in Louisiana, which is so smart and so intentional and so well done. I mean, as someone who has benefited from being able to access and have a deep love of New Orleans and Louisiana music and culture for my entire life, it's just so encouraging to see leaders like the Ella Project and the work that Tiger's doing and many others to say we need to advocate for this. We need to fight for this. This stuff matters. This is not just, I mean, yes, it's about, sustaining business, but this is about a lot more than just business. This is about our soul, and this is about who we want to be. So thank you for organizing this and hosting it. And thanks for everybody to be who are hung in there today on the webinar.
Fabulous, Michael and Ashley. We're hosting this thing, so we get the last word. So it's over to you.
Okay, well,
Well,
thanks.
before
Thanks,
you,
Katie.
before,
Go ahead.
Ashley, I'm sorry to interrupt, but um, I'm just attending, listening. I'm in Caddo. This is ML Dumars. You've helped me several times.
I knew.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say, the question was asked about anything that may be positive that's happened. So I kind of have a positive plus a question. We have a poet laureate for Caddo Parish now, which I see as a very positive thing, and it's certainly helped to get literary arts a little more attention. But I just wondered if there was, any suggestions or, tips or awareness of how we can really increase that as an art, more venues for us to get ourselves out there. Mostly we have like author days at the library, things like that. But to really start to get a more equal footing with visual arts and performing arts, I just wondered if there was, anything you could address to that.
Maybe that may be an entire separate workshop, I think.
Thank
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And
just
I sent a message in the chat, so maybe later y'all might be able to respond to that.
well,
Yeah,
I'm
I
a,
mean,
let me
I think it's a good thing to talk about for future. Tiger, I'll let you get in because I know.
see. Just right quick. Miss Dumars, Miss Leah Russell, Miss Quaja Bell, the Louisiana Division of the Arts. They do poetry out loud, and they do an amazing job with that. But that's for younger artists. But I think you should get involved with that. One, two. Libraries. Start at your libraries and work from there. Make sure, that's what I'd say. But email me, we'll discuss that more.
Thank you, Tiger, and thank you, Mary. Ashley, take us home.
Sure. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and thank you to Tiger and Michael in particular for lending your very extensive expertise and experience. It's been very illuminating. Speaking of illuminating, do you all see Gene's the light coming out of his head? Now I've got that means we have good ideas, right? Now, not always. We do often though. We do often. Y'all, we've got I'm not gonna be a Debbie Downer, but it's no secret. It's challenging time, right? It's challenging time just across the board. With government, federal, state, and local. And I mean, it's throughout Louisiana. I read this. I read the report that was released a couple of days ago about all the cities that rank as being most housebroke. Like it's really hard living here right now, being able to afford to live here. And so we have some challenges ahead. We're going to really need to come together when it comes to advocating for resources from local, state, and federal level. And we have to be able to get together, form cohesive arguments and work to push our agenda and these action items forward. So I'm looking forward to that. There's nothing like a good fight to get me signed up. So I really hope that we can all work together to make things a little bit better for all of us and to ensure that the culture that permeates throughout the state of Louisiana continues to thrive.
Excellent, excellent. And I look forward to that as well. And I think that, with people on this call, with all the attendees, with our esteemed panelists, I know we've got a good team who is going to continue to listen to ideas and be able to take those ideas forward, and to know that it's going to depend on the citizen action to really drive it. That the professionals are key, but without the actual people behind them, it's not going to work. So thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate everyone coming out. Really good crowd today. Hope everyone has a lovely Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see y'all next time. Until then, everyone take care.
Thanks, everybody.